On the sheet that I've given you, the very first problem that I want everybody to do is I want you to write a program, a couple lines of code that inputs 3 test scores and computes the average. So on problem number 1, just write the solution for 3 test scores, declare 3 test scores, and compute the average. And I want, in the spirit of what we did yesterday, which I thought worked kind of well, I want somebody to come up and do that for me here. Okay? So we're all doing problem number 1 on the exercise sheet. And I'd like a volunteer / somebody I call on to come up and do the first problem. These will get harder, so again, the advice is do something you think you know the answer to, because the problems are going to get harder. Okay, so Tyler's going to do this first one. He's no dummy. So this is nothing new. We're going to take 3 test scores and compute the average, and we can all do that, right? We should all be able to do that at this point in time. Just declare 3 test scores and compute the average. So everybody should be doing this, just declaring 3 test scores and computing the average of those 3 test scores, which is pretty easy, right? Declare the 4 variables, 3 of which are test scores, and 1 of which is the average. Don't look at him. Do it yourself. Come on. Why are you copying? Everybody should know how to do this. Declare 3 test scores, input them, and compute the average. The only thing that I would say is that we've been advised by, for security reasons, to not put 3 on one line. So if you could put score 1, if you could declare score 1, it's a recommendation for secure coding to declare each variable per line. Sometimes I do it too. So some of my examples, I keep trying to catch them. Well, the problem is with initialization. So if I did what he did and I initialized the last one, only the last one would get initialized, and you may think you were initializing all 3. So it's really more, it's not really something somebody could hack. It's more of a problem just in the robustness of the code. Okay? So again, if he had done score 1, score 2, score 3, and said equals 0, only the last one, and you might have thought you were doing all 3. So it's just, that avoids that false sense of security, essentially. Okay? An easy thing for us to do, so I always teach students to do it. Okay, so in this case, it's pretty easy to input 3 test scores and to compute the average, okay? And everybody has the same thing, right? Awesome. Okay, so then the next problem, so this is for a defined 3 test scores. The next problem allows you, I want you to, if you look at number 2, I'd like you to write the code that allows you to input as many test scores as the user wants using the sentinel value of -1. So you're going to need a loop. Input test scores until -1 and compute the average this time. So write the code for number 2. This time, you only will need 1 test score variable. And you're going to do the steps necessary in order to compute the average. All right, so we're going to do number 2. So we need a loop. We need a sentinel loop. So hopefully everybody feels comfortable setting up a sentinel loop, right? Raise your hand if you need help, if you want me to look at it. So start with the loop condition. Let's put problem number 2 on the board. I think it's below. Is it below here? Do I have it in the compiler yet? Yeah. So we're doing problem number 2, and I'm looking for a volunteer to do this one. Looking for a volunteer to do problem number 2, okay? Yemi's going to do this one. So this time we use 1 test score. And we need to do what in order to compute the average? Make a total. And what else besides a total in order to compute the average? A count. So he's going to add the steps to do a total and a count. He's going to read the test scores in. He's going to sum them all up. He's going to count them and then compute the average after they've entered the -1. I just think you need to indent everything. So this is his start step. Why don't you tab that guy too? So a lot of you probably started with, well, test score is not equal to -1. Does everybody feel comfortable with this now, hopefully? Okay. And then he's going to add the accumulator and the counter into the action steps. This should be pretty automatic to you by now, right? Every time you want to compute an average, you're going to, okay, what does he need before this? Because he's got multiple steps. Bracket. Okay, so now he's going to do a counter, which the two steps, you want to pick up a handout? The two steps for the counter are count plus plus, and then he would have to initialize it up top, and then he needs a total. Okay, so put a semicolon here. And then don't forget to initialize the counter to 0 up front. It's fine, you're being brave. So put the counter up top before the loop and set it to 0, right? Sometimes I even do that when I declare it, yeah. What type should the counter be? What type should the counter be? Why? It does matter for counter. For counter, because when you count things, what type of number is that? The whole number, right? Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So the counter should be a whole number, okay? And he's going to set that to 0, and then the total. If test score is float, then the total should be a float. And then he's just going to read the. He's going to put the accumulator next. So it's going to be total equals what? Remember? Exactly. So he adds each test score to the totals. This all makes sense, okay? And then he's going to ask for the test score again. You can stand to fix up the indenting a little bit, but just do your restart step again. Not so easy, is it? It's hard typing up in front of you. And then he needs to implement, he has to do that. So he'll have to declare total and set total equal to 0. Yeah. Yep. Could you initialize it in the declaration? Yes. Yes. And then he's going to compute the average after the loop, because you don't really, generally, unless the program specifically asks for a running average, you don't do the average till you're all done. So the average calculation goes here. And we all know how to compute an average. And what test should he add to this? What test should you add to this? What happens if they enter -1 as the very first test score? And it'll quit, and count at that time will be 0. So it'll divide by 0. So you need to add a test here. If count is not equal to, right? Does that make sense? Okay? Which is why I love this problem so much, because you have to remember all these things, okay? So we have to check for divide by 0 question on that. Does that make sense? Why we do all this? This is all review right now, okay? And then he would print the average, and we've got the logic there. So thank you for doing that. Okay? So then the question number 3 is, can I print the test scores that were entered in problem number 2? No, what happened to them? I got written, all I have is the last test score, the -1 actually. So I didn't store the test scores, right? So if I have 5 test scores and I want to compute the average, okay. I make test score 1, test score 2, test score 3, test score 5, test score 4, 5. But if I have 100, that's not going to work, right? So what if, which is the case in many situations, I want to be able to store 1,000 test scores and I want to be able to access them. I don't want a different variable for each one. Does that make sense? Okay? So we want to have the ability to store the test scores. If I now, thanks, perfect. If I wanted to find the highest test score, I'd have to change the code. I don't have the test scores. They've all been entered. They're gone. All right? So I'd like the ability to store the test scores and be able to do a bunch of things to them, not all as I'm reading them in. Okay? And if you look at question 3, 4, and 5, basically we cannot answer 3, 4, and 5 with what we have now. So I'm going to show you a way to create an array, okay? So an array